Jonathan Harper's office rose so high above the city that it seemed detached from the world below. The floor-to-ceiling windows gave him a view that stretched far beyond the Hudson. The skyline bathed in the warm, fading gold of the afternoon sun. He sat at his desk in a light blue suit so finely tailored it caught the reflection of the glass, making it shimmer like silver. Everything in the room was precise, immaculate mahogany polished to a shine. Shelves lined with awards, a decanter of whiskey he hadn't touched in months. It was the command center of an empire that spanned continents. And yet, as he adjusted his cufflinks, a habit that came whenever silence lingered the long and inexplicable, unease pressed into his chest. It was the kind of feeling he never trusted, yet never ignored. For all his billions, Jonathan Harper was still a man, and sometimes instinct whispered louder than logic. When the phone rang, the sound cut through the office like glass shattering. He leaned forward, expecting the voice of an assistant, or perhaps another investor demanding attention. But the voice that broke into his ear wasn't polished, or smooth, or commanding. It was small, trembling, a whisper broken by sobs. "Mr. Harper, your son. He's lying on the street. He's not moving." The words landed like a blow to his chest. For a moment, Jonathan thought he had misheard. He searched for the flaw, the error, the cruel prank. But the tone of that voice carried something no adult could ever counterfeit: raw fear. The kind that only a child could spill so honestly. He straightened in his chair, every muscle suddenly rigid, his breath catching against the weight of silence. His world, the empire, the power, the fortune faded in a single instant. All he could hear was a trembling girl, and all he could picture was Daniel, his 6-year-old son, motionless somewhere on cold pavement. He gripped the phone tighter, demanding answers, words tumbling from his mouth faster than he could think. "Where? What street? Tell me now." His own voice cracked in a way it hadn't since he was young, and the child's voice stumbled back through the line, gasping an address between sobs. Jonathan didn't wait to process it. His chair skidded backward, crashing against the floor with a dull thud, but he didn't even look. The walls of his office, once symbols of triumph, seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with their irrelevance. He saw flashes in his mind, Daniel's blue eyes sparkling in the garden, his laugh echoing through summer air, his small hand gripping Jonathan's finger with a trust that had once humbled him. Now those same eyes were closed somewhere on the street, surrounded not by love, but by strangers and stone. His pulse pounded so violently it roared in his ears, drowning out the city below. The little girl's sobs still lingered in the silence of the call as he tore open the office door and stormed into the hallway, no longer the untouchable billionaire who commanded boardrooms. In that moment, Jonathan Harper ceased to be a CEO. He was only a father, frantic, desperate, running against time, and nothing else in his empire mattered anymore. The elevator doors hadn't even closed before Jonathan jabbed the button for the lobby with a force that left his thumb aching. The gleaming chrome walls reflected a face he barely recognized his own, but stripped of its calm control. His eyes were wide, restless, flicking between the glowing numbers as the elevator sank floor by floor to slow, unbearably slow. The air inside felt stifling, pressing in on him with the weight of every wasted second. He wanted to scream at the machinery, rip it apart with his bare hands, anything to make it move faster. For the first time in years, he wished for nothing but the impossible, more time. When the doors finally opened, he bolted through the marble-floored lobby like a man being chased. His staff barely registered who it was: Jonathan Harper, the unshakable CEO, before he was gone, striding out into the humid air of late afternoon Manhattan. The city felt different, crueler. Every honk of a horn, every impatient shout from the street seemed designed to mock him. He yanked open the door of his black Bentley, the one his driver usually chauffeured, and slid behind the wheel without thought. The keys rattled in trembling hands as he jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, but his heartbeat drowned even that sound. He peeled out into traffic, the squeal of tires drawing angry curses from pedestrians, none of which reached him. The only thing he heard was the echo of the girl's voice repeating in his head, "He's not moving. He's not moving." It looped like a nightmare chant, eating away at reason. He cut across lanes, horns blaring all around him, cars swerving to avoid his reckless rush. Normally, he prided himself on precision, on the perfect calculation of risk versus reward. But in this moment, there was no calculation, only raw, reckless speed. The skyscrapers that had always been his trophies now loomed like prison bars. turning every intersection into a cage keeping him from his son. He drove like a man possessed, as though New York itself had become a labyrinth designed to keep him away from the only thing that mattered. Every red light was an enemy, every delay a dagger. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, growling curses at the crawl of taxis and delivery trucks. His vision blurred with a surge of panic when traffic stalled in Midtown, and for an instant he thought about abandoning the car altogether, running the rest of the way on foot. He gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened, whispering Daniel's name like a prayer, as though saying it aloud could keep his son tethered to this world at last. He turned onto the street the girl had gasped out over the phone. The sight hit him like a collision. A small crowd had gathered in a broken ring near the curb, their faces pale and whispering. His car screeched to a stop at the edge of the gathering, tires biting into the asphalt. Jonathan flung the door open so violently it rebounded, the car engine still running. Forgotten. Then he saw him. Daniel lay on the cracked pavement, his small frame frighteningly still, his chestnut hair mussed, his little shoes scuffed against the concrete. The world around Jonathan dimmed, the sounds of the city drowned out by the pounding of his own blood in his ears. His legs nearly buckled beneath him as he stumbled forward, his polished shoes scraping grit and glass. And then his gaze fell on her. The little girl. She was kneeling beside Daniel, her blonde hair tangled, denim jacket streaked with dirt, small hands hovering helplessly above his body as though she longed to fix something. She didn't understand. Her face was pale and wet with tears, but her eyes, startled blue eyes, locked on Jonathan's with such intensity it stopped him in his tracks. She whispered, voice cracked and trembling, I tried to help. He wouldn't wake up. The words stabbed deeper than any insult, sharper than any loss he had ever known in business. In those words lived her fear, her helplessness, her fragile courage. And in that moment, Jonathan Harper, the billionaire, the empire builder, the untouchable man, fell to his knees on dirty concrete, his expensive suit scraping against the grit. There was no wealth here, no empire to protect him. There was only a father on the edge of despair, and a little girl who had refused to abandon his son when the world looked away. As he pressed trembling fingers against Daniel's cheek and bent low to listen for breath, the faint wail of sirens began to cut through the city noise, growing louder. To most, it was just the sound of emergency. To Jonathan, it was the sound of salvation, yet it felt as though those sirens might not arrive in time. And all the while, the little girl's eyes stayed locked on him, her small body tense, as if she was bracing for something even worse. Jonathan's knees were still pressed into the rough pavement when the sirens grew louder, swelling through the city like a storm about to break. The red and blue lights reflected off the glass windows of nearby shops, dancing across Daniel's pale face in flashes that looked far too much like a farewell. Jonathan pressed his hand against his son's chest, searching for a rise, a flutter, anything that could convince him this nightmare wasn't permanent. The faint, shallow breath was there, but so fragile it made him feel as though Daniel's very life could slip through his fingers. If he looked away for even a moment, "Stay with me, son," he whispered, his voice cracking. His forehead bent close until strands of his carefully styled hair fell across Daniel's still face. "Please, just stay." The crowd around them murmured like ghosts. Strangers lingered, shifting uneasily, unwilling to draw closer, unwilling to leave either. And yet there was one who didn't move. The little girl. She knelt only a breath away, her hands curled into fists at her sides as though holding herself together. Took every ounce of strength. Her tear-streaked face was blotched with fear, but her wide blue eyes never left Jonathan, as if she feared he might collapse too. The wail of the ambulance stopped suddenly as the vehicle screeched to a halt, its doors bursting open with a metallic slam. Paramedics in navy uniforms rushed forward, their bags clattering against their sides. Voices sharp and efficient, slicing through the haze of dread. "Clear the way. Step back." The crowd shuffled backward, but Jonathan didn't move. His arms tightened around Daniel instinctively, protective, almost feral. When the first medic reached for the boy, Jonathan's grip tightened. "You're not taking him unless I—" The words were jagged, barely formed. "Sir," the paramedic interrupted firmly, eyes flicking to Daniel's still body. "If you want him alive, let us work, *." The truth in those words sank into Jonathan like ice water. His hands trembled as he let go, though every instinct screamed not to. He hovered inches away, eyes locked on every movement as the medics lowered Daniel onto a stretcher, checking his airway, pressing stethoscopes to his chest, wrapping a small cuff around his thin arm. Jonathan wanted to demand answers, scream for them to move faster, but his voice died in his throat. Behind him, the girl edged closer, almost invisible among the blur of uniforms and flashing lights. Jonathan felt her presence before he saw her, small, fragile, but steady in a way that unsettled him. She reached out, almost touching the edge of Daniel's stretcher, then froze and pulled her hand back, whispering under her breath like a secret prayer. He caught fragments of her words. "Don't leave him. Don't leave." The ambulance doors flung open. "We're moving him now," one medic shouted. Jonathan climbed it without hesitation, but just as the doors were about to slam shut, he caught the girl's face through the shifting light. She stood frozen at the curb, hair wild, jacket hanging loose, her body so small against the hulking ambulance. For the first time since the call, Jonathan really saw her not just as a trembling voice or a tear-streaked face, but as a child who had chosen to stay beside his son when no one else did. Something inside him rebelled at leaving her behind. The thought of the girl standing alone on that street, the same girl who had given him the chance to reach Daniel in time, felt wrong. He thrust his hand toward the paramedic holding the door. "Wait, bring her." The medic frowned. "Sir, we don't bring her." Jonathan's voice shook, not with weakness, but with a desperation that brooked no refusal. The girl blinked in shock, as though she hadn't expected to be seen at all. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, her body trembling between running and stepping forward. Then, with timid steps, she climbed inside. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in with the scent of antiseptic, rubber gloves, and fear. Jonathan sat rigid, gripping the side rail as Daniel's small chest rose faintly under the oxygen mask. The medics fitted over his face. Across from him, the girl huddled into the corner, her knees drawn up, her denim jacket bunched in her fists. She stared at Daniel as if willing him back to life, her lips moving in silence. The same secret prayer whispered again and again. Jonathan's throat tightened. He wanted to ask who she was, why she had been there, how she had known to call, but the words stuck behind the heavier truth pressing down on him. His son's life was a thread, fraying with every passing second. All he could do was cling to the image of those faint breaths, pray the thread held long enough for the hospital lights ahead to become salvation instead of farewell. And in that moment, trapped in flashing lights and the pounding rattle of the ambulance, Jonathan understood something with terrifying clarity. His empire was meaningless, every deal and every victory hollow. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's boardroom or the market shift. He was only a father, clutching the edge of his son's stretcher, hoping the fragile heartbeat under his fingertips would not be the last. The ambulance jolted as it hit a pothole, the violent shudder throwing Jonathan against the cold steel wall. His hand never left the stretcher, fingers digging into the thin mattress where his son's body lay so still. Every bump, every turn, every second felt like a test designed to tear him apart. Daniel's small chest rose and fell beneath the oxygen mask, but so faintly Jonathan feared he was imagining it, that at any moment the movement might stop. The monitors beeped in erratic rhythms, each sound stabbing through his heart like a countdown to something unspeakable. The paramedics worked with grim efficiency. One pressed a stethoscope hard against Daniel's chest, listening with eyes narrowed, while another prepared a syringe filled with clear liquid. "BP is low. Keep oxygen steady. We may lose him if we don't stabilize soon." The words weren't meant for Jonathan, but he caught every syllable. They seared themselves into him, each one heavier than the last. "We may lose him." Jonathan wanted to scream at them, to command them as he would an underperforming executive, but this wasn't a boardroom. This was life clinging to threads, and here, power meant nothing. His voice cracked as he begged, "Do whatever you have to, just don't let him go." Across from him, the little girl sat curled into the corner, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. The ambulance lights flashed across her face, painting her pale skin red, then blue, then white again. A strobe of fear etched into her small features. She didn't flinch. Her eyes wide, unblinking, remained fixed on Daniel, as though by staring she could anchor him to this world. Her lips moved silently, whispering words Jonathan couldn't hear, but somehow understood. A prayer, the driver shouted from the front. Traffic's blocked on 7th, rerouting through 53rd. The ambulance swerved, sirens wailing louder, pushing against the weight of a city that never stopped moving. Jonathan's chest tightened. Every detour was a theft, every delay a gamble with his son's life. The paramedic adjusted the mask on Daniel's face. muttering under his breath, "Come on, kid, stay with me." Jonathan's stomach twisted at those words, as though fate itself was a dealer calling a bluff. He reached forward, brushing his fingers gently through Daniel's tousled chestnut hair, the same hair he had ruffled 1,000 times in the garden. He wanted to believe his touch could call him back, that a father's hand could be stronger than the darkness threatening to take him. The little girl's voice broke the silence, trembling but clear enough to pierce through the silence. He was smiling before, she whispered. Jonathan turned, startled by the sound. Her small hands clutched her jacket tighter as she continued. He was looking at the sky. Then, he just fell, like someone took the air away. Her voice cracked on the last words. As she pressed her forehead to her knees as though ashamed for speaking, Jonathan's throat burned. He wanted to ask her who she was, why she had been with Daniel, how she had known to call. But the words that pressed against his lips weren't questions, they were gratitude. Gratitude for this fragile, trembling child who hadn't run when everything in her small body told her to. Gratitude that she had been the one to find his son, not a stranger who might have walked away. The ambulance lurched again and then began to slow, the sirens echoing off the walls of a looming hospital. The medics barked orders as the doors flung open, the night air rushing in cold and sharp. The stretcher was pulled out with terrifying speed, wheels clattering against the asphalt as they raced toward the sliding glass doors. Jonathan followed, nearly stumbling, his chest heaving, his hand never letting go of the rail. The girl hovered at the edge of the chaos, unsure if she was allowed to follow. One of the hospital staff held out a hand to stop her, but Jonathan turned sharply. His voice, hoarse but commanding, cut through the night. "She stays." The staff hesitated, glancing at the trembling figure in the denim jacket, then stepped aside. She hurried after Jonathan, her small footsteps echoing against the sterile tiles as they entered the glaring brightness of the emergency ward. Inside, everything was motion. Nurses swarmed, monitors beeped in furious patterns, and doctors issued orders that snapped like whips. Jonathan stood helpless at the edge of the flurry, unable to cross the invisible barrier that separated him from his son. His body shook with the need to do something, anything, but he was powerless. His empire could silence governments, bend economies, move mountains of steel and glass, but it couldn't command the tiny heart inside his son's chest to keep beating. The girl slipped closer to him, almost unnoticed. Her small hand brushed his sleeve, tentative but real, grounding him. "He's strong," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the noise. "He'll fight. I know he will." Jonathan looked down at her, at the tear-streaked cheeks and the fierce light in her frightened eyes. And for the first time since the phone call, something shifted inside him, not hope, not yet, but a reminder that even in the darkest moment, there was still someone who believed. The doctors disappeared with Daniel behind swinging double doors, and Jonathan was left standing in the hallway, stripped of everything except the unbearable silence that followed. His knees threatened to give out, but he forced himself to stay upright. His fist clenched so hard his nails bit into his palms. Beside him, the girl didn't move. She stood guard in her own way, small and steadfast, refusing to abandon the boy she had found on the street. And Jonathan realized, with a shiver that cut through his very soul, that she might know more about his son and about the night. That had changed everything than he could possibly imagine. The waiting room of the emergency ward was a world of its own, sealed off from the chaos that had just swallowed Jonathan whole. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, far too bright for the despair that clung to the air. Plastic chairs lined the walls, filled with people clutching their own fragments of tragedy, an old woman ringing her rosary beads, a teenager with bloodied knuckles, a mother cradling a child wrapped in a stained blanket. Jonathan had walked through 1,000 airports, hotels, and boardrooms, but he had never felt the kind of crushing helplessness that pressed down on him here. He paced, unable to sit, his polished shoes squeaking faintly against the sterile linoleum. The clock on the wall ticked in agonizing seconds, each one stealing something from him. Daniel was behind those doors, surrounded by strangers in white coats, his small body fighting battles Jonathan couldn't enter. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles whitened, his nails carving crescents into his palms. For once, there was nothing to buy, no deal to strike, no contract to wield. His empire meant nothing in this place. The little girl had taken a seat on one of the molded plastic chairs, her knees tucked up, arms hugging them tightly as though to protect herself from the cold that seemed to seep through the walls. Her blonde hair hung in messy strands around her pale face, but her eyes never left the double doors that had swallowed Daniel. She sat like a soldier on guard, too small for the role, but too stubborn to abandon it. Jonathan watched her from across the room, torn between questions and silence. Finally, he approached. His voice came out rough, ragged, far into his own ears. "You stayed all this time. Why?" The girl blinked, startled by his words, then lifted her head slowly. Her voice trembled, but carried a strange firmness for someone so young. "Because he was alone." She hugged her knees tighter. Nobody should be alone. The simplicity of it hit Jonathan harder than any accusation. In boardrooms, he had built his life on complex layers of contracts, strategies, maneuvers. Yet here, a child had spoken a truth that stripped him bare. He sank into the chair beside her, elbows resting heavily on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. For the first time since he was a boy, he whispered words he hadn't said in years, quiet, pleading words meant for a God he had long ago dismissed. The double doors swung open, and a doctor strode out, his coat flaring with urgency. Jonathan shot to his feet, his body rigid, his throat tight with hope and dread. "How is he?" The doctor's face was carefully controlled, but Jonathan saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Your son is alive, but it was close, very close. His oxygen levels dropped dangerously low before you brought him in. We've stabilized him for now, but the pause was a knife twist. We need to run more tests. We have to know why this happened." Relief struck Jonathan like a blow, so sharp it made him stumble back against the wall. Alive. His boy was alive. But the word test lingered like poison. It wasn't over. It had only begun. He nodded mutely, unable to trust his own voice. The doctor gave a final nod and disappeared again, leaving Jonathan in the same purgatory. Only now, with a fragile thread of hope fraying in his hands, the girl shifted in her seat, her small voice breaking the silence. "He smiled at me, right before he fell, like he knew something." Jonathan turned toward her, every muscle tightening. "You were with him?" Her face flushed. She looked down at her sneakers, scuffed and dirt-stained. "I was walking home. I saw him. He was looking at the sky. He smiled. Then he just dropped, like his body forgot how to stay awake." Her lips trembled as she forced the words out. Jonathan's pulse quickened. His son, out on the street, alone, and tell her. Why hadn't anyone told him Daniel was there? His nanny should have been watching him. Someone should have known. His thoughts churned, questions firing like sparks in a storm, but the girl's voice pulled him back. "I called because I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do, but I couldn't leave him." He looked so small. Jonathan's chest constricted. He lowered himself into the chair beside her again, really looking at her this time. She was too thin, her jacket too big, her shoes worn in ways that spoke of long walks and little comfort. But her eyes, those blue eyes, carried a fire he couldn't ignore. Fragile, but unbroken. "Do you have someone here?" Jonathan asked gently. "A parent? Someone we can call?" The girl shook her head quickly, her hair falling across her face. "No. Mom's working. She always works. And Dad's gone." Her small shoulders hunched. "I'm used to waiting, but I didn't want him to wait alone." Jonathan swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. For years he had told himself he was doing it all for Daniel, the Empire, the late nights, the endless expansion. But what had it really been for, if his boy ended up lying unconscious on a street, saved not by the security he paid for, not by the walls of wealth he built, but by a little girl who had nothing? The silence between them grew heavy, filled with truths Jonathan didn't want to face. The hum of the lights, the murmur of other families waiting, the steady tick of the clock, all of it blurred into nothing. There was only the fragile bond forming in that sterile room, between a powerful man stripped of control and a child who had chosen courage over fear. And deep down, though he didn't yet know how, Jonathan sensed that this girl was not just a passerby in his story. She was a thread woven into something far bigger, something that had been waiting in the shadows all along. Asterisk, the hallway leading to the intensive care unit felt like a tunnel carved out of glass and shadow. Every step Jonathan took echoed too loudly, as though the hospital wanted to remind him how alone he was in this moment, how powerless even his billions made him here. The little girl trailed a few steps behind, her sneakers squeaking softly, her denim jacket bunched in her fists. Nurses passed them, wheeling carts, carrying charts, murmuring in clipped tones that carried both urgency and indifference. Life and death decisions were made in these corridors every hour, and Jonathan realized with a chill that his son's life was just one more name on their list tonight. The doctor stopped at a door marked with Daniel's name hastily scribbled on a chart clipped outside. "He's stable for now," the doctor said, voice measured but wary. He regained some consciousness briefly, but drifted off again. "We'll run neurological tests to see what caused the collapse. For now, you can sit with him." Jonathan barely heard the words. His hand shot out and pushed open the door before the doctor even finished. Inside, the sterile white room smelled faintly of antiseptic and plastic. Machines beeped in uneven rhythms, their lights flickering against the pale walls. And there, on the bed, lay Daniel so small under the crisp hospital sheets. A tangle of wires and tubes surrounding him, his chest rising faintly with each shallow breath. Jonathan's legs almost gave out. He moved closer, his hand trembling as he reached out, brushing his fingers across Daniel's hair, pushing it gently off his forehead. His son's skin was warm, but clammy, his eyelids fluttering as if caught between worlds. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Harper, the man who never begged, felt himself break. "I'm here, son," he whispered hoarsely. "I should have been here sooner. I won't let you be alone again." Behind him, the little girl hovered at the threshold, her face half hidden by the doorframe. She didn't dare enter, but her eyes locked on Daniel as though she belonged to this room in some unspoken way. Jonathan glanced back at her, and for a moment, something shifted. Her expression was not just fear or sympathy. It was recognition. A faint sound pulled him back. Daniel's lips parted, his voice dry and weak, barely more than a breath. "Daddy." Jonathan leaned in so quickly his tie brushed against the sheets. "Yes, Daniel, I'm here. I'm right here." Relief flooded through him, hot and dizzying. But then Daniel's small hand lifted with surprising effort, pointing not at Jonathan, but toward the doorway, toward the girl. Jonathan followed the gesture, his brow furrowing. "Do you know her?" he asked softly, uncertain if Daniel had the strength to respond. Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile, his eyelids fluttering open long enough for a flicker of blue to meet Jonathan's. Then he whispered something so fragile it was almost lost beneath the beeping of the monitors. "She was waiting for me." Jonathan froze. Waiting. His son had been with her. Questions thundered through him, each one more impossible than the last. He turned toward the girl, who stood rigid, as if she had been caught trespassing in a place she had no right to be. "Why would he say that?" Jonathan demanded, his voice sharper than intended. "What does he mean you were waiting for him?" The girl flinched, but didn't run. She stepped slowly into the room, her small sneakers squeaking against the tile. She clasped her hands together tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. "Because it's true," she said softly. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't falter. "I wasn't just passing by. He was coming to see me." The words hit Jonathan like a blade. The empire he had built, the life he had orchestrated so meticulously, suddenly felt riddled with cracks. His son, his only son, lying unconscious on a street because he had gone to meet a girl Jonathan had never seen before. Jonathan stared at her, his chest heaving. "Who are you?" His voice carried not just suspicion, but dread. The girl's gaze flicked to Daniel, then back to Jonathan. She took a deep breath, her small shoulders trembling under the weight of what she carried. "I'm not just some stranger," she whispered. "Daniel knows me, because I'm his sister." The machines beeped steadily in the silence that followed. But Jonathan's world tilted violently, the floor threatening to disappear beneath him. The girl's words hung heavy in the sterile air, reshaping everything he thought he knew about his son, about himself, about the life he had built. And for the first time since the call that had shattered his glass towers, Jonathan felt the true enormity of what was unraveling, not just a near loss, but a truth that could destroy or save him, depending on whether he had the courage to face it. Jonathan staggered back as if the girl's words had struck him harder than any physical blow. His sister. The phrase looped in his head, crashing against everything he thought he knew. He had spent his life in control of every variable, every deal, every number, but this was chaos of the deepest kind, the kind no empire could contain. His throat tightened as he looked from the trembling girl to his son lying beneath the monitors, Daniel's small chest rising and falling with the fragile rhythm of borrowed strength. The girl's eyes glistened under the harsh hospital light. She wasn't lying, he could see it. Not in the desperate set of her jaw, not in the way her little fists balled at her sides, not in the way she spoke the words as though she had carried them, burning and unbearable, for far too long. "My mom told me," she whispered, each syllable breaking like glass. She said I had a brother I'd never met. I didn't believe her, but then I saw him. I knew. I just knew. Jonathan's stomach churned. 1,000 questions collided in his mind, none finding ground. Who was her mother? When? How? He had lived in boardrooms and airports, his relationships fleeting, his past carefully sealed away. Yet here was a child, small and trembling, with eyes that echoed his son's, claiming a truth that could rip his carefully curated life apart. Daniel stirred weakly on the bed, his lips parting again. Jonathan bent close, terrified to miss a word. "Daddy," the boy rasped, his tiny voice no stronger than a whisper. "Don't be mad. She was just waiting for me. She's nice." His head lolled slightly toward the girl, and for the briefest moment, his pale face lit with a flicker of trust, of connection. Jonathan's chest tightened painfully. His son, his only son. The boy he had thought he knew inside and now was tethered to this stranger in a way Jonathan couldn't understand. A truth bigger than wealth or pride was unfolding here, one that could not be negotiated or buried. The doctor slipped into the room quietly, clipboard in hand, breaking the silence. "We've stabilized his vitals. He'll need to stay under observation, but the immediate danger has passed." Relief and terror mingled in Jonathan's veins. The reprieve felt paper-thin. The doctor continued, his voice even. "You should prepare for some hard questions. Children don't just collapse like this without reason. Family history, underlying conditions." He glanced at the girl, then at Jonathan. "Sometimes answers come from unexpected places." The words stung sharper than intended. Jonathan nodded stiffly, though his gaze never left the girl. The doctor left, and silence filled the room again, thick and suffocating. Finally, Jonathan crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. His voice was unsteady, stripped of its usual steel. "If what you're saying is true, then that means your mother." His words faltered. Memories clawed their way back. Nights and cities he had buried under success. A woman he had once loved, but left behind when ambition swallowed him whole. The girl's chin quivered, but she didn't look away. "Her name is Claire." The name punched through him like a key turning in a locked door. Claire. A name he had not allowed himself to speak in over 7 years. A name that carried laughter, tenderness, and the one mistake he had buried under layers of empire. Jonathan's breath came ragged. If Claire's daughter stood here, trembling but brave, then the empire he had built on the illusion of control was built on sand. "You're saying, you're mine." The girl's small voice steadied with surprising strength. "I didn't come here to ruin anything. I just wanted to know him. I wanted to know if I really had a brother." Her gaze shifted to Daniel, her expression softening, fragile but fierce. "And I couldn't leave him there. I couldn't let him be alone." Jonathan sank heavily into the chair beside the bed, his hands covering his face. The weight of everything he had built pressed against him, suddenly meaningless compared to the truth he had tried to outrun. His fortune could buy towers of glass, armies of lawyers, fleets of jets, but it could not erase the fact that he had a daughter who had walked into his life through fire, carrying courage he himself had never known. Daniel stirred again, his voice weaker, but clearer this time. "Daddy, don't let her go." The words, fragile as spun glass, tore Jonathan's defenses apart. He looked at his son, then at the girl who had saved him, and realized the choice was no longer his. It had been made for him the moment she picked up the phone with trembling fingers and called. The finality of it washed over him. The empire meant nothing if it cost him his children. His legacy wasn't glass towers or billion-dollar contracts. It was this boy and this girl. One who had been his pride, the other who had been his shadow. Jonathan reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and placed it on the girl's small shoulder. She flinched, then froze, as if the weight of his hand carried the truth she had been waiting for all her life. His voice broke as he whispered, "You're not alone anymore. Neither of you are. Not ever again." The machines beeped steadily. Daniel's chest rose and fell. And in that sterile hospital room, where empires crumbled, a father was reborn.